What is up, YouTube? ZukiM1 here, and I am back with a brand new YouTube video. Today we are going to be talking about the current state of champions and what it looks like in terms of the direction of where Riot are taking their champions, and do late game champions even matter anymore in Runeterra. So if you guys clicked on this video, you probably saw the title, which alludes to me saying that late game champions, I feel, are not as viable anymore in the current state of the game. Now, obviously, that is an extremely controversial type of topic, and I would need a lot of hard evidence to back up my claims to help me illustrate what I'm trying to talk about here. Now, my reasoning for bringing up this is to basically help Riot, if possible, right? To help Riot realize that if you want late game champions to have the impact that they're supposed to have and match the cost that they have, you have to make them more impactful. So, looking at earlier champions versus looking at late game champions, the biggest difference between the characters are obviously the stats, right? So the highest to date is Aurelion Soul for 10 costs, and he is 10/10, obviously, right? But then you have other high cost champions who do not match their stats and does not make a lot of sense. So Nautilus, for instance, right? If I was to draw him early, before I got a chance to go deep, and it's turn 7 and I drop him, he's just a big body, right? Granted, he's a big body with tough and fearsome, but he's still just a big body. Scion doesn't do anything until you get to his power, so he sits in your hand until you're able to drop him. And Tryndamere kind of goes into the whole Feel the Rush deck, and I have a whole opinion about the Feel the Rush and why I believe that that deck has slowed down tremendously in terms of usability and popularity, and that is mainly due, in my personal opinion, right? I'm not saying that this is the reasoning for everybody, but I believe that the main reason why decks like Feel the Rush has slowed down tremendously is because Disintegration exists, right? Disintegration is a 2-cost card from Noxia. I'll show you guys right now. It's a 2-cost card that says you pick a unit, anybody. You pick a unit, and the next time they take damage, they die. They're not injured. They don't take damage. They just straight up die. So you are literally rewarded with the ability to kill anybody in the game by paying 2 mana and either chump blocking them or spending at the minimum sometimes 2 to 3 other mana depending on what region you're in. So now decks goals, which was to bring out these extremely strong champions, can't even rely on that anymore, because there are effective ways to remove those units off the board before you get a chance to do anything with them. And there were plenty of other methods to be able to kill those types of units. Oh, well, not kill per se. You had Ionia with Will of Ionia. And also Homecoming, which are 2 really common options that are ran in most Ionian decks. With Freljord, you could just frostbite them to death and just constantly poke at their health. Now, if they do have rejuvenation, then that's going to be a little bit more tricky. You had Thermite Beam for Piltover and Zion, and a whole lot of other options for every single other region. Like Bandle City had Mini Morph, which you wasted 12 mana to be able to summon both of these guys, I could spend 12 mana and turn them both into 3/3 non-effective units. Right? So there were more than enough options to check these cards. It's just Disintegration just literally checks everything in the game. But this video isn't to talk about how busted of a card Disintegration is. It's basically talking about the idea in theory in terms of why Riot are releasing more 4-cost units. So if you look at most decks nowadays, most 4-costs are the pinnacle of the game right now. At one point in time, 3-costs were definitely the things to beat. You had guys like Zed, you had guys like fucking Misfortune and Fiora, and I think some people were using Katarina. I don't remember. She always had like really spotty usability, but Callista was definitely one of them, right? These were oh yeah, and definitely Draven and Ezreal. Right, so these characters were like at the top of the tier list. People were abusing them, and they were amazing. Right, then you have started seeing the trend of Riot constantly releasing champions that costed 4 that were the thing to beat. Right, and as you can see, the 4-cost units are the most saturated, right? There are way more 4-cost units than there are any other cost in the game. So this idea is reinforced by Riot themselves, by them constantly releasing 4-costs, saying that this is going to be, they wanted it to be easier to summon, but they also wanted it to be right there on that, it's kind of expensive too, right? Spending 4 mana to summon a champion is pretty expensive, right? It's not cheap, but it's not breaking the bank all the time either. So that's the perfect number that most people want to be able to spend when summoning a champion. So, for instance, when running something like an Alawi deck, right? When you are getting up to turn 4 and you have enough mana to summon her, sometimes it's not always the best to summon her, and that's just being very greedy. And sometimes you're punished for being very greedy, right? So that's why the 4-costs, I think, are such a great check, because there are times where you want to summon those guys, but you cannot summon those guys because it's just so counterintuitive to the current tempo of the game, right? You spending that much mana, you don't have any other resources to do anything else on that turn, costing you the game sometimes, right? You can't be greedy with your plays. Sometimes you gotta play to what the tempo of the game is. And so I believe to help improve playability for these later game champions and to make them more appealing is, one, obviously create more late game champions. Outside of like 4-costs, 5-costs are probably the second most supported number, and 5-costs I think is also a really good number for champions. It's just they can be very expensive at times. When I was playing Azir Aurelia, and I know, I'm sorry, but I was playing Azir Aurelia in rank, and I was climbing through the ranks, and one match that stood out to me was the one where I was going to get to Viego deck, and he kept constantly trying to summon his Viego, and I kept recalling his Viego, right? His entire deck strategy was for him to get his Viego to level up, and I kept recalling it, and I would take up most of his turn because he costs 5. So his whole play was literally just trying to summon Viego, and my whole play was to counteract his Viego summons while I already had a board. So was that being greedy on his part? Yes. There is no point in ever for you to constantly trying to summon a unit if you see that I can constantly keep bouncing it back to your hand. You're literally killing your turn, not allowing yourself to be able to play the game. Mind you, this was plat elo, so this is not a beginner, this is not a rookie, this is somebody who understands the game to a higher degree than most other players. and he was still constantly trying to be as greedy as possible to summon the Viego and trying to set him up as soon as possible. And that right there is just not good resources management material. You have to manage your resources. You only got 10 mana, then you got 3 spell mana, so you got 13 mana in total. If you spend on turn 5 all 5 mana to summon Viego, and I bounce your Viego back to your hand, there is no point on turn 6 for you to try to attempt to summon the Viego again until you establish a board where my biggest threat isn't your Viego. My biggest threat is your board. Right now, I'm attempting to try to stop you from doing what your deck is already trying to do without the champion being involved. But the problem with higher cost champions is that that's your whole turn most of the time, right? When you summon a Anivia, that's your whole turn. When you summon a Darius, that's your whole turn, right? And so on and so forth. And the most cost-efficient champions, in my personal opinion, are champions that when they're summoned, regardless of what they do, if they do something during that turn, then that means that they made an impact on the game and that they are going to really worth their cost. So for instance, at first I did not think J4 was worth his cost. To just summon a free 6 cost that gives himself a barrier isn't that impressive to me when I first started playing him. What made him impressive to me was the fact that no matter how many times he challenges a unit, he can always generate a barrier, which is extremely useful. So that means that every time that I use his Cataclysm after he levels up, obviously, or every time that I gave him a challenger and I challenge a unit with him, he's going to have a barrier, which is going to deal about 7 damage to every unit that I decide to challenge. And that's a lot of damage to be able to try to eat up over and over again. And then I can keep doing that over and over again. So that makes J4 a very cost efficient champion, right? Because I can clear a board with J4 alone depending on what my hand is, and that can be very impactful. That can make a big difference. Same thing with Anivia, right? She has last breath, and because she has last breath, that means that she dies. So when she becomes Ignivia, she already died. The Anivia died. Ignivia is what's left, right? And even if you kill the Ignivia, the deck is centered around spamming her death to bring out more Anivias with Rekindler and other cards that bring back units that died that turn. And then you have 6 Anivias on board. That's impactful. So it makes you killing her not worth anymore. And the only deck that really counters her is Xerath. So that means one champion out of the entire game would stop her from being able to reach her full strategy. That's value, right? Hecarim, I think that his ephemeral allies need to be lowered for the cost that he's at. Now, if they was to lower his ephemeral to about 5, I think he would definitely resurge back into the meta and be a very viable champion for people to want to use again. And he would be able to make a huge splash on the game and really shake up a lot of things and, you know, get people thinking like, man, you know, maybe these late game champions aren't so bad anymore. So the reason why I brought up those two is because these two are probably the most used outside of like Sejuani. Sejuani is probably the most used high cost unit, and it really doesn't feel like she costs that much because when she comes out, she makes a huge impact from everything that she does. She is literally the most overloaded high cost champion I've ever seen in Legends of Runeterra. She first comes out and frostbites a unit and gives them vulnerability, so that makes her easy to be able to overrun something because she has overwhelm, right? So she can frostbite somebody, give them vulnerability, run them over with Overwhelm, and then that's not even the worst part of it. Once she levels up, any ping of damage will freeze the entire board. This one champion literally counters about 70% of the cast of the game. Imagine, you just went deep. Your board is wide. You are about to swing and Sejuani activates Warning Shot. Literally a 0-cost burst speed spell to freeze your entire board, ending your turn. That is power, if I've ever seen before. That is what true balancing of a high cost champion should be. I cannot stress this enough. Like, that character is good. She is good. Really, really good. And the only other high cost champion that I can excuse for their value is Galio. Galio makes the game winnable when your board is wide already with a whole bunch of formidable units, right? Especially with the current decks that's using him, the Bard Galio, that makes him so good, right? So that's where I'm at with this whole thing, and I personally think that the deck speaks for themselves, the results speak for themselves, and it's a lot harder to excuse running decks like Feel the Rush and trying to make guys like Malphite, who has never really seen that high of a play rate, Scion, who has completely fell off the face of the earth, Aurelian Soul, who cannot be used anymore just because of the fact that the game just doesn't allow him to be used anymore. Like, it's just not a nice format for him to be used. Like, don't get me wrong, there's still going to be people who's going to play the character, and there's going to be people who can find use for the character, but that being said, it's still going to be tricky to find a point where you can just summon him without worry of him just getting blown up and you spent your whole turn summoning this big ass dragon, right? But that's just my opinion. What do you guys think? Do you think the high cost champions are perfectly fine and they don't need to be changed or reworked or anything to them? Or do you fall in line with what my thinking is that they need to add more high cost champions and give them the ones that currently exist a little bit of an extra, like Darius didn't see any playability until they buffed him at least like 3 times to get him to the point where he is right now, and he still doesn't see that much playability, unfortunately, right? Because he's just a 10-6 unit with Overwhelm. That's his whole thing. 10-7 unit with Overwhelm. That's his whole thing. That's his woo, wow. He needs more than that. There's no way. Like, Sejuani does more than you, bro. Literally the same cost, 1 damage point less of that of power, but way more versatility of a character. Same thing with Hecarim. 1 point less of damage, but way more versatility. Once he levels up, all ephemeral units gain +3 damage. That is game. That is literally game in his deck. He is so good. But you got to see 7 ephemeral champions attack. I mean, sorry, not champions. Units attack. So that can take some time sometimes. And granted, by the time you get enough mana to summon him, you should have reached that. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to summon him, swing, and then get the level up. And when that happens, people will have the answer. Because we live in a format where Disintegration exists, Thermite exists, Will of Ionia exists, Homecoming exists, right? There are too many cards to check these guys without having them do some form of impact before they go. Sejuani did her job when she was summoned. J4 did his job when he was summoned. Galio did his job when he was summoned. You get what I'm going with this? Like, they're doing their job on summon, and they continue putting in work after that point. Versus characters like Darius Nasus, that's why I didn't even touch Nasus, because he's fucking garbage. He's a walking silence stick. You activate one silence, he's fucking garbage. Or Malphite, he doesn't do shit. He just stuns a unit on play and he's tough. Whoa, like that's not that impressive. And that was after 2 separate buffs. That's what they decided on, to make him be able to stun on play and then have tough. No, sorry, 3 separate buffs. They reduced the amount of that he needs to, the amount of landmarks that you have to play to level him up. They gave him the ability to stun on play, and they gave him tough. That's what they gave him. 3 separate things, and he still doesn't see play. But at least he does something on summon, so it kind of falls in line with what I was suggesting with the whole, when this character hits the board, they need to do something. They need to be in the game on summon, because if they're just a big body on board, Disintegration, Will Ionia, Homecoming, and so many other options. But that's just me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did, make sure to hit me with a like and a subscribe if possible. It really does help out the channel. We are currently like 14 subscribers away from 3,000 subscribers. Man, I would go fucking crazy. Actually, I would like to host a LOR tournament to celebrate. If you guys would like to participate in that, so just let me know if you guys would want me to host one of those types of things. But this has been Zuki-N1, and I hope you guys have a great morning, great evening, great afternoon, and great night. But I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.